In this tutorial, we will create a localized app and compare the differences between the original localization and the new localization in SwiftUI strings catalog. The tutorial will begin by implementing the original localization, and in a later tutorial we will implement the same app using the strings catalog. So this is the application and the functionality that we will create. It will allow the user to change the language of the application by clicking on the change language button. As you can see at the moment, this is all in English. Clicking on the change language button, and then I can set the language to Spanish, and as you can see, the language changed to Spanish. Or I can set the language to French, and then it changes to French, and it also persists the selection. So each time when you launch the app, it will load the correct language that should be displayed on the application. The first thing we need to do is add our strings file. Because we're using 3 different languages, we need to create 3 string files, and this will include French, English, and Spanish. So to do that, just right click within your project, select new file. Within the filter, type in strings and select strings file legacy. As I said earlier, in a later tutorial, we will convert the actual application to use the new strings catalog. But in this tutorial, we're using the legacy one just to show you the comparisons. This is the string file for French, so just type in fr.lprog. And then it creates a file, there, your strings file. And then we just apply our text, which is here. This is the text that will be converted to French. As you can see, it has a welcome message, and the welcome message is in French, and it has a footer text that will be displayed, and an application title, and the navigation bar text, and language selection title, and the captions for choose language and change language for the buttons. Now we need to repeat the same process for English. So right click, hold down the control key, left click and hold down the control key, and then select new file. Within filter, type strings and select the legacy file, which is the middle one. And then just type in the following, eng.lproj. And then I'll just copy the text. For the English conversion. And then the final one we need to do is Spanish. Hold down the control key and left click on your mouse. Type in strings. Click on next. and then type in es.lproj. Then we just get the text for Spanish. The next thing we need to do is to create a new class called Language Manager. Select SwiftUI, click on Next, Language Manager. Add the following to the Language Manager class. Class Language Manager observable object to observe and detect any changes. Static let shared equals Language Manager, and that will create a shared instance of the Language Manager class. At published var selected language equals en. So the selected language by default will be English. Func set language code string. The purpose of this function is to enable the app to set the language that's been specified by the user. If bundle.main.localization.contains language code. So what we're doing there, we'll check if the provided language code is supported by the application. So if it's true, then try to set the language by using user defaults. User defaults.standard.set language code for key my language or my languages. And this will set the language to user defaults so that the language is always persisted when the application is opened and closed. Selected language equals language code. Next thing we need to do is to define the language codes that are supported var supported languages string, so this will return a string of languages that are supported. Return en es fr. And this line is also called a computed property. The next function we need to create is called language display name. For language code string that returns a string for the display name. So what this does, it just looks for the language codes, and for each of the language codes, like if it's en, then it will just return English as the display name for that language. Case es return Spanish case fr return French. Default return blank. I've forgotten the colons. It needs to be at the end of the case. I'll just compile it. The next thing we need to do is to add another file, or another file called extensions for strings. So this will be strings plus extensions. Select Swift file, name the file strings plus extensions. And then type in extension string. And then we'll be extending our string by adding our own localized function. Func localized using language code string that returns a string. And then the next one we need to do is to attempt to find the localized file path for the given language code. bundle dot main dot path for resources, language code, lproj, which are these string files, lproj. Let bundle equals bundle path else. Line 15, what that does, it creates a bundle from the found path and then accesses the localized content. Return ns localized string self comma. On line 17, if no specific localization is found, then it defaults to the main localization. And then on lines 18 or after lines 18, we just type the following: return ns localized string self table name is nil, bundle value comment is blank. So if it reaches line 20, it will return the localized string using the specific bundle of that language code. I'll just compile it. In next week's lesson, we will add our language selection view that enables the user to select their language that they want to be assigned to their application. In this tutorial, we will add the language selection view to enable the user to set the language for their application. So this is what we will create. We'll be creating this view that includes the languages. So if I want to change the language from English to Spanish, I'll just click on the option and then the language is automatically updated for the application. Within your project, add a new SwiftUI view and call the view language selection view. Language selection view. We can delete the preview. Next thing we need to do is to add an environment variable at environment object var language manager equals, not equals, language manager. So we just create an object variable of language manager, and this variable will be able to access the language manager from the environment using the environment object. The next thing we need to do is to retrieve and store the current language using app storage. App storage my languages var current language string equals local or local current language code identifier. So what that line does, on line 13, if the current language that was retrieved from app storage, if it's nil, then it will supply a default language, which is EN for English. So it just retrieves and stores the current language using the app storage. Next thing we need to do is to create an app state variable that's called selected language index. And the purpose of this variable is to keep track of the selected language index that the user is selecting from the application, such as English, French, or Spanish. And to enable the user to dismiss or close the view, which is the language selection view, we need to create an environment object that allows the user to dismiss the current view. Presentation mode. On lines 20, we need to create a navigation view. And the purpose of the navigation view is to embed the content into a navigation with all of the other elements, which includes the B stack, and this is to display a title, choose language, and choose language is our localized string that we added in our string files. For example, fr.lpog, as you can see, it has a localized string called change language, and this is the name or the word in French. Localized current language. Fonts. Title 2. Just styling the text element. Font weight. Bold. Padding. Top 20. And the next thing we need to do is to create a list. And the purpose of the list is to display a list of supported languages for the application. If language manager.supported languages.count, so going through the array is more than 0. If there's more than one language, and for each 0 language manager supported languages, so going through the array elements, ID gives each language a unique ID, so it can be displayed on the list. Index in. And our closure. So for each language in the array, we want the application to create a button for each of those languages. And each of those languages will include, each of those buttons will include a click event. Let language code equals language manager supported languages index. Get the language code for the selected language using the index. Language manager set language code. And what that does, it sets the selected language in the language manager. Current language equals language code. Selected language index is equals to index. self.presentation mode wrap value dismiss to dismiss the current view. And the next thing we need to do is to display the language name on the actual button. Within the H stack. So we need a text element, language, manager dot language display name, language manager dot supported languages index. Dot font dot headline dot foreground color dot primary. Oh, there's an error here on line 49. Cannot convert value of type character to expected string. That should be selected languages, because we're getting the index, the value from the selected languages array. Supported, that should be supported languages. Dot supported languages. I just compile it. And then the next one we need to do is to add a spacer. And the purpose of the spacer is to add spaces between the text, which is this part here, and also an image that we're going to create now. If selected language index is equal to index image system name checkmark dot circle dot fill. Checkmark should be a lowercase m. Dot foreground color dot blue dot image scale dot large. So what that does, it will display a check mark if the language is selected. Else, display an empty circle. So this is like doing radio buttons. image, system name. So it's like saying if the radio button has been selected or not. Foreground color, dot secondary, dot image scale, dot large. Dot padding, dot vertical 10. And then on line 66, we need to add on a pair, dot on a pair. If let index equals language manager dot supported languages, that should be supported dot supported languages dot first index of current language. So what we're trying to do there, we're trying to find the index of the current language in the supported languages that was selected by the user. So if that's true, then selected language index is equal to index, else if there's some error or the operation couldn't be completed, we need to fall back and use a default value for the supported language. Let default language equals en. If let default index is equal to language manager dot supported languages dot first index of default language, that means the default language will be English, so we get the selected language index and make that the default index. Current language is equal to default language manager dot set language default language. And then we just set the list style. You don't have to set the list style, it's up to you. But I just set the list style just to make it a little bit nicer. List style inset group list style. which is the second one. And then we need to add a little spacer to the bottom. And then we also need to make sure that our navigation bar title is also localized, language, selection, title, localize, using current language. Display mode, inline. I'll just compile it again. In next week's tutorial, we will call the language selection view from the content view to enable the user to have full access to the GUI. So that's for next week. In this tutorial, we will complete the localization application to add the text fields, which are these text fields, text elements, to the content view, and also to add this button to the content view as well, so that the user is able to select their desired text that they want to be displayed on the application within their desired language. The first thing we need to do is, within the content view, enter the following. At app storage, my languages, var current languages, string equals local dot current dot language code en. So lines 12, what it's doing is getting the language code from app storage, and if a language code doesn't exist, then we use en as the default language for the application. I missed out something. That should be language code dot identifier as well. The next thing we need to do is create our environment object at environment object var language manager. So we create our language manager object, which is type environment object. And the reason why it's environment object is because we need access to the object in any view. At state private var is language selection active. equals false. So when it is language selection active is true, that will enable our language selection view, which is this one here, to be displayable on the screens. So it will navigate to that view when the is language selection active is true. Next thing we need to do is delete the lines between 17 and 23, and then we need to add a navigation view, vstack, add our text elements, which is welcome, message, dot, localized, using, no, that should be localized, not uppercase, not lowercase, should be localized, using our localized string, this one here, current language, on lines 12, that should be current language and not current languages. Current language. So on line 20, what that does, depending on the user's preference of the language, it will localize the first text element. So if the user selected French, then the language would be in French. If the user selected Spanish, it would be in Spanish. Else it would be in English. Dot font, title 2, to style the text field. Font weight, dot bold, dot padding, top 20. Next thing we need to do is to add our button. Is language selection active? It is now true since the user has clicked on the button. And then within our button we need to display a caption or text so that the user understands what the button is meant to do. Language dot localized current language dot sheet is presented. When the user clicks on the button, we will present a sheet, and that sheet will then display our language selection view. So we need to make it binding. Is language selection active? And now we need to display our language selection view and then pass the environment object to the language selection view. Which is the language manager as we defined on lines 13. We give the sheet, a bit of padding, 20, and then the next thing we need to do is add our text element, and this will be for the footer text, localize using current language, dot font, dot footnote, dot foreground color, dot gray, dot padding, top, and 20. Dot multi line text alignment, dot center, and then we just add a spacer. We also need to localize our navigation bar text, our title, navigation bar, title, text, app title, dot localize, current language, display mode, inline. The next thing we need to do is to go to our app file that includes the app main, and then we need to define our @state object, our language manager is equal to language manager dot shared. And then we need to pass the language manager to the environment object so that the environment object is available throughout the application. So now I'll run the application to see if it works or not. It's working. So as you can see, the default language, because we ran it for the first time, the default language is English. So if you want to change the language of the application to another language, just click on the change language button, select Spanish, and as you can see, the language has been changed to Spanish. And then if I stop the application and then rerun it, the language will still be Spanish because the settings is saved in app storage, which is similar to user defaults. As you can see, it's Spanish, and Spanish is selected here as well. I can change it to French. Thank you for joining us. If you found this tutorial helpful, please comment, like and subscribe. See you next week.